I'm disappointed that I came to Canada, a Canada that it is very, very difficult to find Canadians who are passionate about the American-Canadian relationship. Elbows up, me too. It was an anti-American campaign.
At the start of 2025, President Trump launched his second term with an aggressive trade agenda. The White House imposed reciprocal tariffs ranging from 10 to 50% on key sectors, including steel, aluminum, copper, and even automobiles. Canada, America's closest trading partner, was hit immediately. Exports slowed, supply chains shifted, and the political climate turned tense. Yet when U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra arrived in Halifax, he told the Chamber of Commerce that this was not a trade war.
The cabinet's now saying that we're at war with America. That doesn't help, okay? Maybe in Canada saying we're at war, maybe that's something that Canadians stand up and say, yes, 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 okay? We have an enemy. I don't think so.
He accused Canada of exaggerating, of playing hardball, and of branding the United States as an enemy. The paradox is clear. Washington fired the first shot with tariffs, but now claims that Canada is overreacting. What the ambassador called negotiation, many Canadians experienced as direct economic pressure on jobs and communities.
We haven't really had a lot of luck with Canada. I think Canada could be one where they'll just pay tariffs.
Don't push a Canadian too far. I mean, push too far. Push too far.
Prime Minister Mark Carney framed the situation differently. For him, the phrase "elbows up" was not an anti-American slogan, but a way of telling Canadians to protect themselves when pushed around. That message resonated across the country. Families cut back on trips to the United States. According to Statistics Canada data for August, cross-border travel by car dropped 35%, while air travel to U.S. cities fell 25% year over year. Air Canada reduced flights south of the border and instead added 28 new international routes to Europe, the Caribbean, and South America. Consumers also adjusted their choices at home. Industry reports show American liquor sales in Canada plunged 62% in the latest quarter, forcing companies like Brown-Forman, the producer of Jack Daniels, to issue profit warnings. Loblaw, the country's largest grocery chain, removed dozens of U.S. items from shelves and replaced them with more than 100 Canadian suppliers. Even culture shifted. Indigo reported that sales of Canadian-authored books rose 25% year over year, while CBC Gem streaming surged 34%, lifting programs like Murdoch Mysteries and Heartland. These are not just slogans, they are real changes in daily life. The numbers tell an even bigger story. Canadian exports to the United States declined 2% this year, equal to roughly $5 billion Canadian dollars. That is a real loss. But exporters quickly looked elsewhere. Shipments to the United Kingdom jumped 63% in value, and sales to Europe rose 26%. In fact, the United Kingdom has now displaced China to become Canada's second-largest trading partner. That shift demonstrates how pressure from tariffs has accelerated diversification. While Washington expected Ottawa to soften its position, Canadian companies found new buyers and new routes. The boomerang effect is hitting U.S. businesses hard. Alcohol producers have lost market share, and once Canadian shelves are restocked with local brands, that space is difficult to win back. What began as an attempt to squeeze Canada is instead eroding American commercial presence north of the border. Ambassador Hoekstra urged Canadians to stop treating the United States as an adversary, but the direction is already changing. Prime Minister Carney traveled to Mexico this month to reinforce trade and energy cooperation. Ottawa is deepening links with Europe and the United Kingdom. Canadians are shifting how they travel, what they buy, and which markets they serve. The tariffs that were meant to reassert U.S. power have done the opposite. They have redefined the relationship, leaving Canada more self-reliant and less dependent on its neighbor. Trump wanted to prove that tariffs could force compliance. Instead, they are pushing Canada to stand taller, with Carney guiding a pivot that is reshaping trade, culture, and everyday choices. The backfire is no longer a prediction, it is the new reality of North American economics.
Setting a tariff for essentially the rest of the world, and that's what they're going to pay if they want to do business in the United States.
What happened to 90 trade deals in 90 days? As people
We've spoken to everybody. We know it's all done.
I think with Vietnam, the UK, with China, not all those are intended to be final deals either.
At the start of August, President Donald Trump declared victory. His global tariff campaign forced allies into quick agreements before his deadline. The promise was stability, with tariff caps around 15% in exchange for huge investment pledges in the United States. On paper, it looked like a win. In practice, details remain vague, and industries in partner countries still feel the strain. Washington's message is simple: invest big or face higher tariffs. That has left allies from Europe to Asia weighing short-term relief against the burden of massive commitments and the risk that Trump could change course again. Japan's auto sector shows the limits of these deals. The World Trade Organization reported that the average U.S. tariff rate now exceeds 20%, the highest in more than a century. For Japanese car makers, this is a real cost.
Short term, we have to brace for the impact. We work hard to find a way to overcome these incremental costs.
Mazda expects almost $1 billion in extra expenses this year. To cope, it is ramping up output at a $2 billion plant in Alabama, built during Trump's first term. That investment softens the blow, but half of Mazda's cars are still produced in Japan for the U.S. market. The company also relies heavily on a large factory in Mexico, which remains exposed until Washington finalizes terms with Mexico. The result is uncertainty, not stability. Europe's metal sector is in a similar bind.
Negotiations, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the framework trade agreement with the US will provide support for Europe's metal sector freight, but details remain in short supply.
Brussels reached a framework agreement with Washington, promising tariff cuts and a quota system. Yet steel and aluminum still face a punishing 50% duty. The quota system, which should allow some duty-free exports, is not yet defined. The European Steel Association says U.S. tariffs have already damaged an industry worth more than $90 billion a year and weakened by falling demand. Business leaders warn they remain in the dark, with little more than promises to rely on. These examples show that rushing to sign has not removed the pressure. Canada took another route. Ottawa refused to sign under pressure, accepting a 35% tariff on goods outside CUSMA as of August 1st. That sounds severe, but CUSMA continues to exempt the vast majority of Canadian trade. According to Scotiabank chief economist Jean-François Perrault, between 85 and 95% of exports remain tariff-free under the deal, when averaged, Canada's effective tariff rate is about 5 to 6%. That is painful, but still lower than the 15% rate faced by Europe, Japan, or South Korea. Although Canada has felt the pain of Trump's tariffs, the country is turning its focus inward. Rather than tying its future to Washington's demands, it is strengthening itself at home.
We've got a lot of work to do on major projects, on affordability, on security in our communities.
This was clear in the recent meeting between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Ontario Premier Doug Ford in Ottawa, where leaders emphasized building national competitiveness and resilience. Some Canadians question whether the government is being too passive in the face of Trump's tariffs, but the data suggests that Canada has avoided the most punishing outcomes while keeping leverage for future talks. Unlike partners that promised hundreds of billions in investments, Canada has not mortgaged its long-term position for short-term relief.
What the Prime Minister actually said during the election campaign. No deal is better than a bad deal. And so we're not going to be in a hurry to sign a bad deal.
The contrast is clear. Nations that rushed to sign before August 1st now face heavy investment costs and lingering uncertainty. Japan's car makers and Europe's steel industry show that the pain did not disappear after the agreements. Canada, by holding firm, absorbed targeted damage in specific industries, but kept the broader economy intact and its negotiating position alive. This is not surrender. It is a strategy of endurance. With energy exports, critical minerals, and an integrated supply chain, Canada remains a partner the United States cannot easily replace. Trump may continue to escalate, but Prime Minister Mark Carney's approach shows that strategic patience is the strongest counterweight to Washington's unpredictable demands.
There's likely to be a fourfold increase in the demand for critical metals and minerals over the course of the next decade. So we're creating a rare earth magnet supply chain between Quebec, between Canada and Germany.
There is no doubt anymore. Trump's tariffs have pushed America's closest neighbor, Canada, to turn toward Europe. When Donald Trump slapped a 35% tariff on Canadian exports outside CUSMA this August, the expectation was clear. Canada would bend. Instead, Mark Carney flipped the script. He scaled back some counter tariffs while keeping steel, aluminum, and autos protected, signaling that Canada would not give away its leverage. That shift opened the door to something larger. Rather than fight Washington blow for blow, Ottawa turned to Europe, using its vast reserves of copper, lithium, and rare earth minerals to build new alliances. What began as a tariff assault quickly evolved into a story of how Canada could outplay Trump by turning resources into power.
Now, Germany has been amongst the leaders in beginning that diversification away from China, particularly China and Russia. Canada can play a role in accelerating that diversification for Germany and for Europe.
That strategy came into focus during Carney's European tour this August. His stops included Berlin, Warsaw, and Riga. But the most important outcome came in Germany. Canada and Germany issued a joint declaration to deepen cooperation on critical minerals, the raw materials that power everything from electric vehicles to wind turbines. Under the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, Canada already had preferential access to the European Union market. Carney used that framework to accelerate new projects in copper, lithium, and rare earths. For Germany, the timing was critical. Since cutting energy ties with Russia, Berlin has been searching for secure supply chains. For Canada, the partnership provided not only an economic outlet, but also a political counterbalance to Trump's tariffs. Instead of depending solely on the U.S. market, Canada was locking in opportunities across the Atlantic with Europe's largest economy as a new anchor.
What turned headlines into substance were the deals signed on the ground. In Berlin, Carney announced that Troy Gold, a Canadian mining company, secured a long-term copper supply contract with Arabis AG, a German smelting and recycling group. In Quebec, Tornat Metals entered into an agreement with VAC, one of the global leaders in rare earth magnets. This created a direct Canada-Germany supply chain for magnets essential to clean energy and defense industries. At the same time, Rocktech Lithium, a Canadian-German company, advanced a new lithium arrangement to support Europe's decarbonization plans. These transactions showed that Canada was not just making declarations, but building the physical trade flows that could sustain a rare earth alliance. Industry experts note that global demand for critical minerals is expected to quadruple by 2035, according to the International Energy Agency. By acting early, Canada positioned itself as a secure supplier for Europe at a moment when the United States was driving uncertainty with new tariffs. What Trump used as a blunt instrument, Ottawa turned into leverage.
Donald Trump helped us get here.
A lesson that our partners to the south, the Americans, have learned about the vulnerabilities in the rare earth magnet supply chain.
And so we need to move quickly.
The contrast could not be clearer. Trump relies on tariffs that disrupt trade and rattle markets. Canada focuses on partnerships that bring stability and predictability. By leaning into critical minerals and strengthening ties with Germany and the wider EU, Carney showed that Canada is not simply reacting to Washington's pressure, it is setting its own course. This strategy also gives Canada more influence in its dealings with the United States. Trump may dominate headlines with new tariff threats, but Canada controls assets that Washington and its allies cannot ignore. Copper, lithium, and rare earth magnets are at the heart of the next-generation economy, and Canada is turning them into instruments of national strength. In this round of trade confrontation, Ottawa did more than withstand pressure. It shifted the board entirely. The message is clear. Trump can raise tariffs, but Canada now holds something more valuable: the trust of partners and the resources to power the future.